After earning a journalism degree from the University of Nebraska, Rainbow Rowell became the youngest ever and the first female columnist at the Omaha World-Herald. She was just 24 years old. After a brief, enjoyable stint in advertising, Rainbow returned to the World-Herald in 2010 and writes a popular, witty, funny, and thoughtful pop culture and lifestyles column. When she's not writing, she's reading comic books, planning Disney World trips, and arguing with people about things that don't really matter in the long run. Have you read her recent Grass is Always Greener in Omaha column? I liked that one. I thought it was funny. She has 2 sons, and if God hears her prayers, they will grow up to be just as nerdy and as true-hearted as the protagonist of Attachments, which is the book that we're going to hear about tonight, and it's actually on sale over to the left of me at that table. Rainbow interned twice in the mid-90s at the Des Moines Register, and on Twitter, she told me that she has a soft spot for all things the newspaper Iowa depends on. If you like Rainbow on Facebook, you'll know that she has many fans and a fondness for Jean the Dancing Machine from The Gong Show. She actually posted a video on it just this weekend. She has a wonderful voice and rhythm to her writing, and we're so excited that she is here at the Des Moines Public Library tonight. So please join me in welcoming author Rainbow Rowell.
Thank you, Sophia. Yes, I've lived in Des Moines twice before when I was a Des Moines Register intern. I thought if I hung around long enough, they would give me a job, but it didn't work. But in that time, I was mostly covering night cops. So my Des Moines experience is really hanging out at the police station and only waking up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, watching Quantum Leap, and then going to the police station. So when I drove in today, a couple of people have apologized for the weather, which I think is a very funny thing to say to someone from Omaha, Nebraska. Oh, we're sorry about the weather. Really? But I thought, oh gosh, it's so bright, and oh, it's so beautiful. The downtown is so beautiful. And I thought, well, yeah, I did spend a lot of time at the police station. So I'm amazed that none of you were in cuffs. So thank you so much, and thank you to the AViD series. This is frankly the event I was most excited about, and I was very excited about the other authors. So I would say, oh, the AViD series, Anne Lamott's going to be there, but not on the night that I'm there. So I missed all of them. Well, I want to talk to you about my book, Attachments, my first novel. It is an unusual narrative, Attachments. I know Sophia has read it, so thank you, Sophia. Half of the book is written in emails. So I've been trying to get people to say that it's an epistolary novel, but so far, right, no one else has. And the way that I started writing this novel, I have worked at newspapers pretty much all my life when I started writing this book. I'd been a columnist at my high school, a columnist in college, and a columnist at the Omaha World-Herald. And in the late 90s, the Omaha World-Herald got email. We were allowed to email the outside world for the first time. I mean, it was kind of a long time coming because we had omaha.com, our website, but we did not have internet access in the newsroom, so we couldn't read our own website. Which seems so strange now that the internet is as a reporter, the internet is more important than the telephone. But at the time, we were all so scared and nervous. What was the internet going to do? And could people use it to break into our defenses and steal things? I didn't know what there was to steal because we kind of give it away the next morning anyway. But there was a lot of nervousness. So when we got internet access and when we got email to the outside world, they told us that they were hiring people to sort the email and to keep an eye on us and to keep track and to monitor. I don't think we were the only company doing this. I think this was a thing. So you knew when you were sending email that there was someone possibly reading your email downstairs. I always thought of it as downstairs because it doesn't seem like people would go upstairs to read your email, right? That's something you would do in a cellar. So you would think that would make you not want to email embarrassing things or things that you could get fired for. But I found that it had no effect at all, really, on our email. You would just feel bad and kind of paranoid about it. Like you'd actually kind of look around as you were typing, you won't believe what she just said to me. I'm going to tell her, and you'd still be typing it, because the beautiful thing about email at work is you look like you're working, not actually being mutinous, or gossipy, or sometimes just genuinely leaning on your friends. I found that when we really used email in our newsroom, I had a couple of really close friends in the newsroom, as a way to prop each other up, Reporters are not supposed to be emotional, but even though a lot of really emotional things happen in the newsroom, being a reporter is a really hard job sometimes. I mean, no one that you talk to, unless you're Sophia and you get to promote, and me now that I get to write pop culture, but when I was a news reporter, hello, I understand you're being charged with this. I understand that your father died. How do you feel? Sad? Oh, sad. So there are a lot of times for me personally working in the newsroom where I just really felt like I was going to burst into tears. And at those times, that's when I would be emailing my friend, like, I just don't know if I can take it anymore. We just didn't even really listen to the rules. We emailed each other constantly. But I definitely thought about this guy. Of course it's a guy, right? There are IT guys. That's kind of a thing, an IT guy. I don't hear IT girl. I'm sure there are. See, probably in this room, I'm being so sexist. But at the World Herald, there were IT guys. So I'd think about this guy in the basement, in a dark room, reading our email, and I would sometimes think about, like, oh, I wonder if that was funny. Or I wonder, well, I hope he's not going to turn us in for this. He should feel, I had a friend who was going through something really horrible. And we were really emailing about it a lot. And I remember thinking, well, if he turns us in for this, he really is a jerk. So because of who I am, I started to think about this story and, who is down there and what is he thinking? And what if there were two people and they were emailing and then there was this guy and what if he fell in love? Because in stories that I write, everyone always falls in love. And it's funny because as I was working on this book, my friend was a police reporter. And she said, oh, I heard you're writing a book. And I said, yeah. And she said, what's it about? And I told her, it's about this guy who gets hired by a newspaper, and he's reading these girls' emails, and he falls in love with one of them. And she went, you're not going to believe this. I'm also writing a book. And in my book, there's this guy who reads the email, and he discovers a murderer. And I was like, that is why you were the police reporter. I don't want to visit your brain. So I started writing the book actually in 2002. And I didn't really start writing it aggressively. I had a friend who's a playwright at the Children's Theater in Omaha, the Rose, which is an excellent theater. If you're ever in Omaha with a kid, take him to the Rose. And he asked me, and so he wanted to bond with me as a writer, I think. He said, what do you write for yourself? Because I write these plays for the Rose, but I'm also working on this. I've got a book, I've got this, I've got that. What do you write? And I thought, well, I don't write anything for myself. The only thing I've ever written in my lifetime is either for an editor or a teacher or professor or for some guy who didn't deserve it. I wrote lots of bad love letters. And so he challenged me to write something for myself. And so I started, we would get together about once a week for coffee, and he would write, and I would kind of pretend to write and drink a lot of coffee, and I'm in the coffee shop looking like I'm writing. And the first thing that I did was I just wrote these email exchanges between these two women. The other thing about working at a newspaper is you're never really, let me think of how to say this. Everything that you say is being edited at all times. And you're not writing for yourself, really. You're writing for this kind of every man or every woman. You're really thinking about a broad audience. And I had so many editors, and I always felt like there was at least one of them at all times who didn't think my jokes were funny. So pretty much I perceived, probably this wasn't happening that often, but I just perceived that they never thought my jokes were funny, and they're constantly cutting them, like nobody's going to get that. So I just started writing these email exchanges between these two women, and my goal was simply to crack myself up. So I didn't really think I'm writing a book, it's going to get published. At first it was just like, well, if I would write a book, this is what it would be about. So for a couple of years I just wrote email exchanges, which Sophia is going to help me read a few now. I tried reading this by myself, and you couldn't really tell what was happening. And so in Omaha, when I did my reading there, I had my brother do it. And I've already warned Sophia that he just killed. He was really funny. He was much better than I was, actually, because I was very nervous because all of my friends and my family were there, so I couldn't even breathe. And I had Spanx on, so I really couldn't breathe. Okay, do you have a mic?
I think, yep.
Okay, I start. From Jennifer Scribner Snyder. Oh, so if you're from Nebraska right now, you're going, Scribner Snyder, that's a consolidated school district. Because all the last names and names in my book are Nebraska towns. Because normally when you watch television or you read a book, it takes place in Los Angeles or New York. I had an author tell me that, Timothy Shafford, I think it was, who's a very, very good author from Nebraska, that he didn't even realize you could write about Nebraska. Because all he'd ever read took place somewhere else. Okay, but there's a lot of Omaha in this book. Okay, from Jennifer Scribner Snyder to Beth Fremont, Wednesday, August 18th, 1999, 9:06 a.m. Subject, where are you? Where are you? Would it kill you to get here before noon? I'm sitting here among the shards of my life as I know it, and you, if I know you, you just woke up. You're probably eating oatmeal and watching Sally Jesse Raphael. Email me when you get in. Before you do anything else, don't even read the comics.
Okay, I'm putting you before the comics, but make it quick. I've got an ongoing argument with Derek about whether For Better or For Worse is set in Canada, and today might be the day they prove me right.
I think I'm pregnant.
What? Why do you think you're pregnant?
I had 3 drinks last Saturday.
I think we need to have a little talk about the birds and the bees. That's not exactly how it happens.
Whenever I have too much to drink, I start to feel pregnant. I think it's because I never drink, and it would just figure that the one time I decide to loosen up, I get pregnant. 3 hours of weakness, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life wrestling with the special needs of a fetal alcoholic.
I don't think that they call them that.
Its little eyes will be too far apart, and everyone will look at me in the grocery store, and they'll whisper, look at that horrible lush. She couldn't part with her Zima for 9 months. It's tragic.
You drink Zima?
It's really quite refreshing.
You are not pregnant.
I am. Normally 2 days before my period, my face is broken out, and I get pre-cramps cramping. But my skin is as clear as a baby's bottom, and instead of cramps, I feel this strangeness in my womb region, almost a presence.
I dare you to call Ask a Nurse and tell them that you've got a presence in your womb region.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. So that's the first chapter of the book, actually. So if you buy the book or check it out at the library, you can skip the first page and just sail on from there. So I really wrote all of these email exchanges, and I had a plot in mind for my 2 women, Beth and Jennifer. And I should have explained this, that Jennifer is a copy editor, and that Beth is a movie reviewer. That's why she doesn't have regular hours. So what I did is I wrote all of these exchanges, and then I decided to have a kid and kind of forgot that there was this book. And it was actually while, in the first few months that my son was born, I had a real rough time. I'm not going to lie, it was hard. My sister came over pretty much every day for a few weeks just to hold the baby and keep my spirits up and tell me to take a shower. And she said to me, weren't you writing a book? And I said, yeah, and she said, well, let me see what you have. So I handed her this stack of emails, and she read them, and I was getting emails from her in the middle of the night, like, oh, this is funny, you should finish this, I want to know what happens. So I decided, I was really stupid. I should have finished this book before I had children, because I had nothing but time then. I can't even imagine what I did with myself. But I didn't. I really got serious about it about 6 years ago after I had my first son and had no time at all. So I had all these emails between the women, and then I finally got to the point where I thought, okay, well, now it's time to write the guy. Because I always knew that there would be the guy reading the email, and it would be the women's emails, then the next chapter would be the guy in his perspective, and then it would be more email every other chapter. I knew I was going to do that. And I thought, I hadn't really thought about the guy, other than he was a guy, and he would be, the hero, and handsome probably, and the girl would fall in love with him. I really thought he was kind of an afterthought. His name is Lincoln, because that's a town in Nebraska. Telling you, it was really just to please myself. What would I like to see in a book? Well, Omaha. So I started to really think about Lincoln, and that's when I realized that I had painted myself into this corner where I had to write a book from a man's point of view, which I had no intention of doing. I had an intention, because I'm not one of those women who's always like, oh, I prefer the company of men. All of my best friends are men. I don't even think like a woman. I'm not that way. This was a book for women, about women's issues, and ladies. And then I realized that so I started writing Lincoln, and I realized that he was actually the main character of the book, because I'm never in the female characters' heads. I'm typing their email. It's like you're listening in on them all of the time. But the chapters from Lincoln are from Lincoln's perspective. So I had to crawl into his head, and I just didn't want to. because I don't know what it's like to be a 8-year-old man. At all. I just didn't want people to read it and go, well, this sounds like a woman writing from a man's point of view, very snittily. And I was very intimidated by that. But then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, I'm around men all the time, and they're constantly talking and telling me what they think and telling me what to do, and it's not like men are panda bears. I can imagine what it's like to be a man. So I really dove into it, and then I just kind of fell in love with his perspective. I loved writing from his perspective. I also really found that I liked writing a love story from a man's perspective. My book is not a romance, but there's a lot of love in it. And normally when you're reading a book, I feel that you're normally reading the love story from the woman's perspective. And as a woman, I think you always want to know what the guy is thinking. I wonder what he's thinking and how is he feeling. And so when you're writing from the man's perspective, you get to totally indulge yourself. Well, he must be thinking this, and you can make him very romantic in a way, because I think men are sometimes romantic internally more so. Maybe not. Maybe it's just my husband who's here. Okay. So Lincoln. The challenge, and this was a challenge all the way through the editing process, was the first thing that you know about this character is that he's reading other people's email, which is creepy. And when I would describe the plot to people, sometimes they would say, well, he sounds like a stalker. I'd say, no, he's not a stalker. It's his job. He has to do it. So I really wanted to make him very sympathetic. And then after a while, you don't have to try anymore because you're just inside the character and he is sympathetic. And I found myself really, really rooting for him. So the story of Lincoln is a quiet, really smart, bookish, like he reads a lot of Isaac Asimov, he watches a lot of science fiction, he plays Dungeons and Dragons, and someone broke his heart in high school. He followed his high school girlfriend, who was a theater student, to school in California, and she started cheating on him immediately. And he never really recovered from that relationship. He came back to Nebraska, and he went to UNL, and he just started acquiring degrees. He got degree after degree after degree. And so finally, when he's 28 and he has a couple master's degrees, he decides it's time for him to grow up. He's going to move to Omaha. He's going to get a real job, but he's still going to live with his mom for a while. So at the start of the book, I know I'm just really making him sound appealing. He lives with his mom. He hasn't dated in years. Okay, so I'm going to read for you the scene. As he's reading their email, he becomes very jealous of the friendship that they have. And he's really entertained by them. And they also make him think about things that are happening in his life. So, and this, I'm not going to read much, because the very first reading I did, I said, oh, what should I do? And she said, don't read. And I said, but it's a reading. And she said, no, it's boring. It'll put people to sleep. So I'm only going to read like a really short page here. And this is the scene where he is breaking up with his high school girlfriend. Probably. Oh, Post-it note, don't fail me now. Okay, here it is. They're back in Omaha for Christmas break. They're in Papillion, if you've ever been to Papillion. They're at a park, and they're sitting on the merry-go-round, and he's trying to figure out why she cheated on him. And he says, why did you want me to come to California with you, he asked, if you knew we were going to break up? I didn't plan it this way, she said, less angry now and maybe a little ashamed. I didn't know when we were going to break up. I didn't know we were ever going to break up, he said. If you had told me that it was a foregone conclusion, I wouldn't have followed you across the country. He stopped talking and looked at her. Even in the dark, even in January, even breaking his heart, she was pink and radiant. She reminded him of a rose bush flowering in stop motion. God, he said, you know what? I probably would have. They were both quiet again. Lincoln couldn't trust himself to speak. Everything he wanted to say was wrong. Everything he wanted to say would make her want him less. I wanted you to come with me, Sam finally said, because I was scared to go by myself. And I told myself that it was okay, letting you follow me because it was what you wanted. And because I guess I wasn't ready to say goodbye to you. They were both quiet for another long while. It's not like I felt out of love with you, Sam said. I'm just not the same person that I was when I fell in love with you. People change, she said. Stop talking to me like that, he said. Like what? Like I'm Lord Greystoke and I need to be educated in the ways of man. I know that people change. I thought we were going to change together. I thought that's what it meant to be in love. I'm sorry, she said. Earlier, Lincoln said, you said you didn't plan it this way. How did you plan it? I didn't plan it. I hoped that we would both just know when it was time, that we'd have one of those moments like in the movies, foreign movies, when something small happens, something almost imperceptible, and it changes everything. Like there's a man and a woman, and they're having breakfast, and the man reaches for the jam, and the woman says, "I thought you didn't like jam." And the man says, "I didn't once." After breakfast, the man will go for a walk, and the woman will go to their room and she'll pack a slim brown suitcase. She'll stop on the sidewalk and wonder whether she should say goodbye, whether she should leave a note, but she won't. She'll just get into the taxi and go. The man knows as soon as he turns onto their walk that she's gone, but he doesn't turn back. He doesn't regret a single day they spent together, including this one. Sam lay back onto the merry-go-round. She talked herself into a looser place. Lincoln lay down beside her so that their heads almost touched in the center. "Who's playing me in your movie?" he asked gently. "Daniel Day-Lewis," she said. She smiled. Lincoln could probably kiss her now if he wanted. Instead, he leaned toward her ear so that she could hear him whisper. "There's never been a moment," he barely said, "when I didn't recognize you." She wiped her eyes, her mascara smeared. Lincoln nudged the merry-go-round into motion. He could kiss her now, if he wanted. "I'd know you in the dark," he said, "from 1,000 miles away. There's nothing you could become that I haven't already fallen in love with." So she totally breaks up with him. She's willing to kiss him, but then she's still like, "Oh no, I'm kind of dating this foreign exchange student." And anyway, so I really, really got into Lincoln's character and rooting for him, and I hoped that readers would too, because I had started writing kind of thinking, well, I just need to write a male character who lives up to this fabulous woman who I've written. But then by the end, I really wanted Beth to live up to Lincoln. And the central problem of the book is once you fall in love with someone when you're reading their email, there's no good way to tell them. You can't. Sometimes he rehearses, he'll just like be standing in the break room, and for a long time he doesn't even know what she looks like. But he's thinking, he'll say, "Hi, my name is Lincoln. Perhaps we should have coffee sometime, and also I love you, and I read your email." And it never goes well in his mind. So the problem is really, will the two of them ever get together, considering, he really fell in love with her with insider information, and there's no good way out. And I thought I'd read one more page, and then are we close to maybe Q&A? Okay, sure. And that is, I'm going to read just a few paragraphs of Lincoln at the beginning of the book when he realizes that he's got a problem. He's got an email problem. Lincoln was never going to send Jennifer Scribner Snyder and Beth Fremont a warning. He may as well admit that to himself. He was never going to send them a warning because he liked them, because he thought they were nice and smart and funny, really funny. See, did you see what I did there? They're really funny. That's me. Okay, wait, sorry, I broke character. Okay. Because he thought they were nice and smart and funny, really funny. Sometimes they made him laugh out loud at his desk. He liked how they teased each other and looked out for each other. He wished that he had a friend or at work he could talk to like that. Okay, so that's how it was going to be. He was never going to send them a warning. Ergo, therefore, thus, he technically, ethically had no reason to keep reading their email. Lincoln had told himself all along that it was okay to do this job, that it was okay to be a professional snoop and a lurker, as long as there was nothing voyeuristic about it, as long as he didn't enjoy the snooping and the lurking. But now he was enjoying it. He found himself hoping that Beth and Jennifer's messages would get picked up by the filter. He found himself smiling every time he saw their names in the web fence folder. Sometimes, on slow nights, he'd read their messages twice. It had even occurred to Lincoln once or twice that he could open up their personal folders and read any of their mail, any time, if he really wanted to. Not that he wanted to, not that he ever would. That would be weird. This was weird, he thought. He should stop reading their messages. If he was never going to send them a warning, he should stop. Okay, Lincoln said to himself, I'm stopping. No, he doesn't. He doesn't stop. Okay. Well, thank you for being such a attentive audience. Sophia, do you come now and do something? Do we sit down on these glass chairs? Okay. Hello. We have it.
All right. Well, thanks.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
for all the insight into
the book. And just a reminder that you can take your cards that look like this and fill out questions at the bottom and pass them down. And we'll collect them and ask Rainbow all of your burning questions.
Everything.
Everything.
I have to answer them.
But to start things off, I have a few questions of my own. What are some things that a real-life Lincoln might find if he was reading your emails, your work emails in the past week? Just curious.
The past week.
Or month.
I just have a really hard time reminding myself to be appropriate at work. And then I left journalism and I went to an advertising agency for 4 years. And just really, they're just, I mean, they can do whatever they want, you know, like they're shopping online, they're IMing each other. There's no sense of you're at work, you need to be using your computer for work purposes, because they figured out that if they let people do the things they need to do at work, they'll never go home. So when I came back to the World Herald after working in advertising, that was a little bit of a culture shock for me, because
Sure.
I had to remember, like, not to use every letter words in my email.
Do you have a Beth-Jennifer relationship in your life? A friend at work who you chat like that with?
Well, people ask all the time, you know, if I base them on certain people. And I think probably the most honest answer for any author, although I shouldn't speak for them, considering I've only barely written one book, is that you kind of base everything on yourself. I mean, your personality is infinite, and also you're a different person. Like, sometimes there are things that they do that's very much something I would have done in my 20s, but not at all something that I do now. But even Lincoln is mostly me. I find myself kind of just picking little slices of myself, and then also my friends. But I did have one really close friendship with a copy editor. She was a copy editor in the living section, and I was a columnist. And she's the person who will probably recognize the most of herself in this book. Deidre, she's in the acknowledgments.
So she knows.
She does know, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and actually, I can talk about this because she said, you know, it's so long ago. But she had a miscarriage. And it was when I wasn't ready to have children yet at all. We were both newly married, and she really wanted to have children. So in the book, one character is terrified of having children. And that's really me. But then that same character is dealing with fertility issues. And so when Deidre had her miscarriage, that's when our emailing at work stopped being so silly and started to be very like air to us. Like, there was nothing more important in that moment than making sure she was okay, because I was also very young, and I thought a miscarriage was something like this happens and, you know, it's over, but it's really not like that. It's a death.
Sure.
And so she was going through this very traumatic thing, and she was at work because she didn't want to tell anybody. I kept telling her, take time off, why are you here? But it was really important for her to be at work. And so there were days when we were just pouring ourselves into our keyboards, and no one around us knew what was happening. And I really leaned on that relationship, because Beth and Jennifer are very funny, but then they're also, they're each other's best friends. And
Sure.
they're always there for each other.
I love that you used Y2K in the book, and I remember, stocking up on water and like not sure if, you know, the earth was going to be here the next day. But what was that like leading up to it in a news organization? Were you still working at the paper at that time?
Oh, yeah, I was still at the paper. And I was the first person to use the phrase Y2K bug in the Omaha World Herald, because I was the Western Iowa reporter, and Iowa was way ahead of Nebraska in like even discovering that this was a problem. I mean, I think we talked about, like, we have extra generators, and
Yeah.
It was really fun writing. Kind of the climax of the book happens over Y2K, and I played with the fact that it's a false climax. So you kind of, I'm giving this away, you kind of think the book is at its climax on December 31st, 1999, but it's really a false. And just like Y2K really was a false climax for us all. I mean, we just were so tense for something to happen, and it was a big nothing. But looking back, it was very fun to talk about what they were stocking up on. It was really, all of the 90s references were fun, because, like, you can talk about Tom Cruise in 1999, and it's totally different than talking about Tom Cruise now. Oh, wow.
And
stacks of questions.
Nothing that Prince didn't know all along when he wrote
Right.
Party Like It's 1999, right? So a few questions from our audience. After writing a book, would you ever consider quitting the paper and focusing solely on writing novels?
Yeah, not immediately. I'd like to just sit here for a moment and think about making so much money that I could quit my job. No, I mean, I've enjoyed writing for the World Herald, and it's a different kind of writing, and it's very lonely writing a novel. So you go in a room by yourself, and I write at Starbucks largely just so that I don't feel like I'm alone. But you are alone, and it's kind of a dialogue with yourself all the time. And it's sometimes you're succeeding with yourself, and you're failing with yourself, and it's very lonely. And then you can't even really talk to people about so if you have a problem with the scene, it just feels like the most important thing to you, and you can't even really talk to anyone about it because your backstory is literally 40,000 words long. And so what I like about working at the World Herald is having editors and having, comrades, and then also having this dialogue. So my column is much more of a dialogue, whereas I'm hearing from readers, I'm responding to them, so it's a much more social, sort of vibrant place to be. I'd love to just keep doing both.
Cool. Is Rainbow your real name?
It is my real name. I should pass around my driver's license. It is my real name. It just seemed like a good idea to my mom in the 70s to name me Rainbow. When I was younger, people would always ask me, "Oh, were your parents hippies?" And I can remember in high school saying no. And now I look back on it and go, let me think. They both had hair longer than mine. My first concert was a No Nukes rally. Yes, they were. And so all the kids in my family have unusual names. My brother is named Forrest. My sister is named Jade. And my younger brother is Haven Brook. And then my youngest brother is Jerry Lee Buckles III, because my mom got remarried. But I hated my name growing up. I thought it is authentically silly. It's a noun, and it's like, just for example, we were on a bus at Disney World a couple months ago, and I have a 3-year-old, and he was sitting by another little girl, and she had one of those pillow pets. It's a pillow and a pet. Yeah, there you go. Really, why wouldn't you want one? It's a pillow and a pet. And I said to her, "What's your pillow pet name?" And it was a purple unicorn. And she said, "Rainbow." I was like, that is an appropriate name for a stuffed purple unicorn, not for an adult person who wants to be taken seriously. So, and then I'm going to keep talking about my name for a few minutes because I've got good material. I've been working on it for a long time. My mom said that I could change it when I was 18. My whole life, that's what I heard. Well, you can change it when you're 18. I didn't want to hear anything about it until then. And so I was going to change it to Sarah with an H. That's like Anne with an E, Sarah with an H. And then by the time I was 16 or 17, I realized that asking people to, could you start calling me Sarah now? No. And then it really became an asset for me because it was a great byline. I remember hearing once that in a readership survey, they'd asked, which columnist did you read? And a number of people had written my name in. And I thought, well, none of the other columnists are named Rainbow. I bet half those people wrote in Sunshine because that's what I get. That's like, I get Rainbow, Robin, and Sunshine. But so I'm very okay with it now. And I gave my kids unusual names too. So.
What are your kids' names?
Well, I would tell you if we weren't on TV. I'll tell you all in person after this.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have an idea for your next book?
I've written my next book. So I told you, I think, I don't remember anything I've said, that I wrote this book over 7 years off and on. And then when I sold the book, it was in 2009, so it's 2 years, even from the point of selling it to now. And then I had to turn around, I had a contract to write the second one, and I had a year. And then actually this book ate up that year, and I had 3 months. So I wrote my second book in 3 months. And it is a love story about two misfit East Omaha teens. It's I'll just tell you, I was reading a lot of Twilight. I opened Twilight and fell in, kind of like, I don't want to say anything bad about Twilight because I love those books the way you would love a person. And I was trying to figure out what I loved most about Twilight because there's some things that, and I decided that I'm not going to say anything bad about Twilight, that it's the love story and the intensity of it. So I wanted to write a book about two people falling in love for the first time. Neither of them vampires, maybe, and wait for the sequel. Anyway, and so it's this just kind of a Romeo and Juliet story about two kids who both need someone to save their lives, and kind of in falling in love with each other, they sort of recognize their own worth and sort of save themselves through love. That sounds cheesy. And it is.
What are your thoughts about the impact new media is having on old media? Will we have newspapers for the foreseeable future?
Well, I'm completely qualified to answer that question. I think that it's not a good idea to get married to the format. I mean, will we have news? Will we have journalists? Will we have a need for people with ethics and training to go out there and tell us what's happening in the world? Well, I think there's more of a desire and a hunger for news now than ever. But we, as newspaper journalists, I think, need to think of ourselves more as people who serve our readers, not necessarily people who serve our printing presses. So I don't know how I answered that. Yes and no. I think it could be for me, it's a very exciting time. Like, it's a scary time because no one wants to pay for anything. Books either. The publishers for my book keep they'll say things like, well, it's just a very challenging time for our medium. And I'll think, well, I work at a newspaper. You don't have to tell me this. I get it. But I think it can be kind of an exciting time if you think about, like, this is a time for us to reinvent ourselves.
Kind of as a follow-up, how has it changed for you being a columnist when you first started to now? Like, do you have different responsibilities or...
I think that you kind of have to meet your readers where they are. So when I left email, so this would have been 5 years ago, you would never email a source. That just never happened. You'd always call them. And now you do everything by email. And even when you're writing a story, you're emailing that person like, oh, I just thought of something. Is this right? I wanted to double check this with you. I still don't like to do email interviews. A lot of people like to do email interviews. But I think that when you're reporting, you're really trying to get an authentic response from someone. And if they have like hours and hours and hours to type it out, it's not really a very authentic response. So I still try to do a lot of things over the phone. But also, I have hundreds of Facebook friends that I've never met because they're World Herald readers. And I find that they're interacting with me more. If I have a column that people like, I hear more about it on Facebook than I do. I never get letters. I rarely get phone calls. I sometimes get emails. And I always get Facebook stuff.
That's interesting.
Do you find that that is also true?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of came into journalism maybe
a lot later than I did.
Yeah, a little bit later. But just because I came to the field later in my life. But, I was getting tips on Twitter, Facebook, of course, people calling in and mostly emails, but yes, rarely letters.
I get letters from prison still, so.
Me too.
Jealous?
Next question. What authors do you like to read?
I read almost exclusively crazy science fiction and fantasy. So that's not true. I do read other authors, but I read a lot. I like Neil Gaiman is my favorite author. And also Dave Duncan is one of my favorite authors. And I don't even know if other people know about him. He writes like 8-part science fiction series, and I think they're the most perfect books ever written. Dave Duncan, yeah. And then I love Marianne Keyes, who is more of a chick lit women's fiction author, but I think she's splendid. She's from Ireland.
Listening to you speak, I can hear your voice, the voice in your columns, and how do you translate that? Do people do they seem surprised when they meet you that they're, oh, I knew you all along, or...
I get a lot of, oh my gosh, you talk just like you write. And I think, well, actually, I write just like I talk, probably. But and I find that people have usually pretty, I'm looking for a word that's kind of like polar reactions to that. That some people would prefer to read writing that sounds like writing, that's more formal, that has more of a distance. And that, as a newspaper journalist, it's always been hard for me to write from a distance. Even when I'm writing third person, I'm right up on it, usually. So it was really natural for me to write a column because it's one of the only places in the newspaper where you can write in first person. But then some people really like it, and I do get people going, oh my gosh, you sound just like you do in your...
I would love to read some of your cop stories.
You don't work at the register anymore. You can look them up.
Yeah, dig them up in the archives.
There's not a lot of voice.
Do the authors that you like and that you read, do you find them influencing the way you write in your process?
That's an interesting question, because I am a mimic. So if I am in a place where people have an accent, I will almost immediately start acting like I have an accent. And yet my brain kind of doesn't know what to do with it, so I'll say, like, how are you all? I don't know what to do. And I'll pick up people's, if someone swears all the time, I'll immediately start swearing. Or I just pick up on little things. So when I started writing attachments, I stopped reading anyone who wrote books like I wanted to write, because I was very nervous about mimicking them. And I don't know if that's a common thing for authors, but I just felt like it's a strength as a journalist, because especially when you're writing profiles, if you spend a couple of hours with them and you can pick up people's rhythms and kind of how they talk, it makes your story much stronger. But I thought, well, I don't know that I want to be picking things up, and I think that's one reason why I started reading so much fantasy and science fiction, because I don't have any science fiction stories in me. I don't know nearly enough about science. I even skip those parts when I'm reading. So yeah.
This next question is about separating the emails between the women from the thoughts that Lincoln is having. And you do that clearly in the book, but was it difficult to kind of keep the storylines straight? Did you read them over as, an email story, and then Lincoln, developing his character through the book?
It was hard, because the person it was hard for was Lincoln, because Lincoln has to have, this story arc, or whatever that's called, but it's being interrupted, and so you kind of want to feel like everybody's moving up and their story is getting more intense all at the same time. And there were times when I would just actually have an outline somewhere where I went and charted his emotional, where he was emotionally, and it would be sad, discouraged, feeling a little better, in everyone. And kind of sometimes I would just read his stuff straight through to see, was there continuity, was it building, or because I think in my first draft I was guilty of, there was a lot of Lincoln pushed away from the computer and looked at the clock, and just. And my editor said, this isn't a movie. So a lot of times your Lincoln scenes are just Lincoln reacting or being thoughtful or just fidgeting. And she's like, that might work in a movie because you'd be conveying all the emotions he was feeling. But this is a book. You need those scenes to have a little bit more weight.
Does that mean there could be a movie?
There could be a movie. There's a producer attached to this book. A very successful producer who's pitching it to movie studios, and this is all happening in New York City, and I don't get daily reports, probably because it would go straight to my head, or I'd get very disappointed about it. But my agent said, just pretend it's never going to happen, and then when it does, or if it does, you'll be like, oh, it happened, great. But when I met with the film agent who was working on it, he said that the movie studios really are curious about how someone would show the email scenes. Did any of you see Julia and Julia? Okay, so that movie, in my opinion, was great when it was about Julia Child and she was in France. And then the scenes where Julie was just just typing and blogging, I thought those were terrible and boring. So, unless that person wants to make my movie, in which case I thought they were great. But, and of course, I was watching it as someone who had just written a book about email, and I was thinking, oh gosh, who wants to watch anyone email? So, I guess there are just conversations about how would you film that. I just watched You've Got Mail recently. And I didn't remember it. They do a great job. It's great. You never feel like they're just sitting in front of the computer staring. It's also Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. So
that's great. Just listening so you wrote most of it after you had your first child, and finding the time, I think, would just be a near impossible feat to do. But then at the end of the day, or whenever you wrote it, how were you creative at that point, once you've exhausted all of your energy with your child and your work? And
well, it was always so different from what I was doing at work. So it was so different from column writing, or when I was in advertising, so different from the sort of more conceptual things that I was doing in advertising. But it was brutal. it was really, really, really hard. And I would just find time. And also, I've heard some authors say, just, a couple hours at the end of the day. It would take me 2 hours to get my head in this place where I remembered where the characters were and what they were doing. And so I needed to have days. So I would really get this is where my creativity came about, how I could clump days together. So for a few years there, Thanksgiving, the most important part of Thanksgiving for me was, 4-day weekend. And sometimes you can find Starbucks that are open on Thanksgiving. So I would just work solid. I'd be there at 10 in the morning and I'd be there till 10 at night. And my husband was very loving and encouraging, and so he would not make me come out of the bubble. So I would really just be going home to sleep and eat whatever was left on my kids' plates, and then I'd go back and write. And that's how I did it. But it was brutal and backbreaking. And so sometimes people say, "Well, what about your next book?" I'll think, just back away from me. I can't even think about that right now. That kind of makes me want to throw up.
Well, reading through the end of the book, I want to know what happens next with the characters. Would you ever consider continuing the story?
No, I don't think so. I felt really good about where they were at the end, whether they get together, whether they don't, whether they ever meet. I felt really good about it. But the next book I wrote was about 16-year-olds. And when I was writing about these two 16-year-olds, they each have kind of a hard time. And so it was so painful to remember being 16 that I was always thinking about, it'll get better when they're in their 30s. She's going to be fine. She's got this terrible stepdad, but she's only got to stay there for 2 more years. She'll be okay. He'll be fine. Nobody, So I was always thinking about where they were in their 30s, and so I finally said to my agent, maybe I can write a sequel, because I've already decided that, he becomes a hairdresser and she does this, and he was like, "You're writing your own fan fiction. You need to stop. You need to back away." Then it became really important to me. Writing about children was different. I really needed in my head for them to be happy at some point in the future.
Interesting. Do you feel like that mentally prepared you for your own kids getting older?
Well, I think it more was me reconciling with my own 16-year-old self. In fact, there were times when I was writing about these two 16-year-olds in love, and I would think about, what if my son reads this someday? And I think, really nowhere near being okay with that. But it more was me being able to I think I was kind of settling some things from my own teenage years. When you're writing about things, you get to explore them in a way that can be really powerful and rewarding, I think.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For reading from the book, sharing about the process, and answering all these questions. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a delight. Thank you.